Okay, my name is Andrew Stuck. I'm one of the co-directors of Walk, Listen, Create. Walk, Listen, Create is a not-for-profit. We're actually registered in Belgium within the European Union, and we've been running for about 2 or 3 years, in which time we've built up about a community of about 2,000 contributors, of which they are artists, performers, and writers who make work on foot or about walking. And what we try to do is we try to support our community members in whatever way we can with not huge budgets, but with time and effort and what we can do. And one of our community members is Anne DeForest. And Anne came up with this really lovely idea of having conversations with American writers, and this is Walking America. So I'm just going to pass over to Anne, and I look forward to listening to her guests.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you. My guests here, I'll say, are Christine Hume, Willa Zong, and Nabil Kashab, and they represent this collection, which is in the Hopkins Review, issue 16.3, summer 2023. I have to do this. It's there. And which is a walking folio, a folio devoted to walking. It's called Traversals. When I came across this, I guess I first came across it when it was in process. Somebody sent me the call for papers, for essays, poems, and short stories. And I was so taken with it, and I immediately got in touch with the editors, Christine Hume and Anna Maria Hong, and was curious about it, told them about the anthology that I had edited, Ways of Walking. And so I feel like I've kind of watched this come together from the beginning. And when it came out, I was just blown away by it. It's an amazing collection. And I'm going to start with, without giving you too much giving too much away, introducing Christine and letting her read from the introduction, because the introduction tells you what this is about and how this collection came together and what they were looking for and what makes it such a different take from most walking anthologies or a lot of the writing that exists on walking. So Christine Hume's fifth book is a collection of essays, Everything I Never Wanted to Know, from Ohio State University Press, 2023, which includes 2 fictionalized nonfiction walking tours. With Anna Maria Hong, she co-edited Traversals, a folio on walking, for the Hopkins Review 16.3. She has taught creative classes on walking since 2008 at the Disquiet International Literary Program in Lisbon, Naropa School of Disembodied Poetics, and Eastern Michigan University, where she is tenured faculty. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks so much, Anne. It's a pleasure to be here. Wonderful to see contributors and the editor of the Hopkins Review. So great. I'll just launch in to the intro. In a society predicated on a militarized spectacle of privacy and safety, what does it mean to take a walk? Writers and artists have long engaged in the walk as a conceptual and generative practice, a spur to thinking and creativity, a way of immersing in nature or the crowd, a surfing of urban serendipities, a place to awaken the senses and incubate private reveries. As we shift through minute perceptions of body and place, our walking propels us into intellectual percolations and kinetic receptivity. Walking establishes an alternating rhythm, shuttling us between inner and outer worlds. And for many writers, the walk is a recursive loop from draft to walk to draft. However, the tradition of the literary walk as a meditative inquiry has also mostly been practiced by cisgender men and straight white writers without disabilities, who are mostly able to enjoy walking in public without fear, psychic danger, and physical risk. So that was the sort of like angle we had on what we were really interested in terms of gathering these 28 writers together for the folio. As practitioners and teachers of writing on walking, we wanted to reinvigorate walk literature as a forum for not only mental meandering, but also as a forum for talking about how we move through locales, rural and urban, when navigating the extremities of the 21st century, particularly as women, BIPOC writers, queer writers, writers with disabilities, and trans and non-binary writers, contending with the likelihood of harm and hostility while enacting walking's pleasures and reclaiming public space. The antagonist's goal is to make you think of him when he's not there, to invade your sense of equilibrium and undermine feelings of safety, the right to exist, move, express oneself in all one's splendor and mess where one lives and travels. Terror flattens the internal landscape so that we're all afraid of the same thing, a pervasive, inescapable threat. A folio is not a legislative space. We can't enact laws to end the persecution of pedestrians without racial, gender, and economic privilege, but we can work on the inner world by making a space in which some of the heterogeneity of our experiences is narrated and considered, a place where one can read about the paths of others, their perceptions, motives for walking, daydreams, traumas, irritations, surprises, puzzlements, regrets, and delights under everyday and extraordinary circumstances. This collection may give you, as it has us, an expanded sense of what else is there when you're walking in there, when you're walking out there, alone or accompanied. Is a walk a dance?
A cosmic journey?
A beauty hunt?
A stabilizer,
A path to or from the work?
A memorial?
A crime?
a clearing,
A rut?
A gauntlet?
A thread?
a badge of faith,
A rant?
A necessity?
A reclamation of inheritance denied?
a self-hypnosis,
A sexy saunter?
A sweaty trek amid cars and ghosts?
A lifelong conversation?
a recounting,
A refusal?
A flame?
A flawn?
A walk is always past, present, and future, taking place over multiple temporalities, historical strata, and conceptual terrains. This brief gathering encompasses writings on walks from Lagos to Paris, Siberia to Omaha, Los Angeles to rural Virginia, from Fire Island to the Fire of the Mind. The range of these writings underscoring the capacity of each writer to ignite new models of belonging and transience as they go. Some pieces retrace writings that pave the way, reimagining where else they might lead us. To walk takes effort, intention. And what follows in the folio, we amble through weathered narrations and stride into unknown territory where meandering may become trailblazing, where setting out is a means of liberation, of finding one's way. Will you walk with us?
thank you. That's
Thank
wonderful.
you. Thanks for helping.
Yeah. Well,
Appreciate
I
it.
think I love big part of the chorus. And when you asked us to do this, I just wanted to say that what I really love about this collection and also about walking in general and also walking as counter to current culture is that we there's a movement in the culture to have a bullying single voice, and the idea of creating and nurturing polyphony, multiple perspectives, many voices is something that you achieve so beautifully in this and is so important. And I think is also something that is what's really radical about walking is that we all do it, but we all do it in different ways and bring different perspectives to it. So I loved when you said, let's do this as a chorus. It just seems so fitting. I wanted to say, Christine already mentioned that we've invited 2 contributors to be our readers today because we couldn't include them all. but many are here in the audience, and I just would like you to identify yourself with a little, one of those little hands or something to say that you're here. And if you'd like, put in the chat what the name of your piece is. And you could just do that while I am introducing the readers. But just to know that we have some of the other contributors here, and I hope that as we're talking, you can also contribute to the conversation. And welcome. Thank you. So our first reader is Nabil Kashab. I want to say that we just had a discussion before the whole Zoom room opened, is that 3 of us here are from Los Angeles, and that isn't really the theme of this talk today, but it could be. I could probably devote a whole session to just talking about Los Angeles and walking in Los Angeles, which is a city infamous as a place that people don't walk, but of course they do walk. And I was delighted to read Nabil's essay, which is called Western Avenue, which is a very long street that originally defined the western border of LA. He is the author of the essay collection, The Obvious Earth, and the chapbook Homelike. His work has appeared in Actually People, Colorado Review, Diagram, Full Stop, the Hopkins Review, and elsewhere. He works in museum technology and lives in Los Angeles. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Andy, for inviting me here, and thanks to the editors. I've really appreciated being part of this project. So my essay was about taking a very long walk in a very hostile place to walking, Los Angeles. And what I'm going to try to do is read the very first paragraph, which sort of sets it up, and then skip a little bit. Hopefully it makes sense. So yes, Western Avenue. And again, I was imagining that the word West, or the Western Avenue, would be this sort of really generic term that didn't really have, for most people outside of Los Angeles, didn't really have very specific reference. Just sort of, it seemed as general as you could be. But in fact, I feel like it is evocative because so many people have spent some time in Los Angeles. Okay, I'm walking from my apartment in down Vermont, September and still hot. A heat dome, says the news, which is why the overcast bodes well. I was thinking I would start toward the suburb where I grew up, someplace like home, see how far I get. To walk is to lack a place, says Michel de Soto. Fine, then I'm lacking. The trash has not been picked up and a little rain wet, it is not a good sweep. I pass an intersection known as Dr. Amarjit Singh Marwah Square, per the commemorative sign mounted to the traffic light, honoring the philanthropist, entrepreneur, and dentist who financed Hollywood's first Sikh temple, 749. So there's little numbers that sort of intersperse the essay, which are sort of timestamps. The next intersection, aka Forrest J. Ackerman Square, is dedicated to the Esperanto advocate and coiner of the neologism sci-fi, 753. That is what I've learned on this walk. Los Angeles has a lot to commemorate, or local government has many constituent bases, don't forget. I'm older now, and to be remembered no longer sounds so bad, but for what? What could I possibly agree to? I moved to here a year ago to the day. The great resignation, says the news. People all over shuffling geographic and economic standing. After almost a decade on the East Coast, I found similar but different work here. I had not lived in Los Angeles since high school 24 years ago. The two facts will not reconcile, having moved away, having moved back, and as a result, everything feels split. Were I to walk from here to there, what would that be like? Maybe I could muster a sense of pilgrimage, or maybe this is, or of performance, like arduously tracing a psychogeographic suture. Or maybe this is bad, fishing for through lines its own species of violence. Utility tracings and surveyor marks on the pavement fluoresce in the flat light 757. Dig here or don't. Skip a few miles. Not far from the mall, I'm struck by a sign over the sidewalk, backlit and deliriously photoshopped. A storefront turned Pentecostal church and on behalf of which two doves fly through a layer of clouds, clouds that bleed into snowy peaks from which rivers of living water cascade into large cupped hands, overflowing these hands, streaming between the fingers in 7 streams down through the bottom of the frame, 113. This intersection has a small dangling marker, seems recent, honoring the sacrifice of one Officer Harry M. Miller, who was thrown from his motorcycle on this spot during a high-speed chase in 1956 after running into a bystander's vehicle, about whom little is remembered. 132. The streets for a 4-block radius are cordoned off by police tape, an SUV waiting at each corner with officers inside chatting convivially, hardly attending to 2 helicopters buzzing low over attractive homes. LAPD has the largest air support division of any municipal area in the world. Residents emerge from a sandwich shop behind the cordon, barely glance. I pass a salon called Hair 911. Above the neighboring shop front, hand-painted lettering reads, records, tapes, CDs, 50s, 60s, 70s. A man with a sparse beard in a wooden chair is parked in front of the door. His head droops as he naps. In the window displays, on the tables arranged outside to either side of him, I see no music, only old toys in a jumble. Dust-caked figurines, small cardboard prints, plastic knickknacks promoting defunct brands. I see now it's all minstrel caricature, 20th century racist Americana, though some looks older. Who is this for? The figures glare out from cartoon features in haunted refusal. An energy emanates like heat lines from each object, from the objects taken together, an inhering hate. But where does the power come from? Whose is it now? The proprietor does not fully open his eyes to take me in. What a figure I must cut my sporty backpack and trail runners. I am dressed for a very long walk, an outfit which I realize reads more as ethically ambiguous foreign tourist than prodigal Angelino. He grunts is all. In the window display on the right, a Michael Jackson poster in front, of which several disco balls of various diameters spin listlessly out of sync, 153. I am preoccupied thinking of the store and its objects, and startle suddenly. Not a snake. Why would there be a snake? In this parking strip, an arm from a green sweater with thin yellow stripes, sodden, covered with dried leaves, 159. There is a municipal banner zip-tied to the construction fencing promoting the Western Ave redesign project, 203. To create a safe, beautiful, state-of-the-art commercial corridor under an initiative called Livable Streets, which suggests that livability is conditional, aspirational, according to the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. Past another community college, more unincorporated buffer land, here batting cages, here untrimmed palms, gravel, and weedy grasses. I cross over the 105 into Gardena. 105 is like the name of a freeway, a big overpass highway. 8 lanes, I think, at that point. 10. I cross over the 105, a freeway that opened in my lifetime, famous for a supporting role in the 1994 transportation infrastructure thriller, Speed. The thrill being its mute, over-budget insistence on remaining unbuilt. Any major infrastructure that does not precede you signifies a before and after in the flow of the city that you now span. It is hard to imagine making a freeway. Through the tree is a giant beige donut. It crowns Donut King 2 Hot Fresh, vassal of the vast Cambodian donut empire, 343. 17 miles. I cannot remember being so grateful for a glazed raised. I've passed from city into county, which feels closer to familiar. The South Bay encompasses several forgettable cities south and west to the coast, vast fungible tracts, vast fungible zones of ageless stucco, self-storage, and anonymous warehousing. Hardly any litter, the sections of sidewalk widen into pristine, roomy expanses that take actual time to traverse. No humans but the occasional raw elbow for an open driver's side window. I'm losing detail. My thinking is slow and cyclical. Plus, I'm sure a blister is emerging on the ball of my right foot. These angels at Taco Bell. I enter and wave my water bottle politely. Though the gesture seems futile, the drive-through line wraps through the parking lot, and the teenagers on shift are in constant motion, attending to their headsets. But then I do get attention. After looking me up and down, I get water, but also crushed ice without asking, and I am emotional. It feels so good in my throat. I pass under the sign for drive-in turned outdoor market where the last vendors unmake their stalls 424. A process of recognition has been creeping up on me. The spread of it, the flatness, the fractal tracks of ranch-style homes, islands hemmed by 8-lane arteries and outsized shopping plazas. This is my sense of Southern California, the one I grew up with. Less and less a transparent eyeball carried on abstract urban winds. I feel myself turn more opaque. Water here careens between long absences and terrible excesses. So much of it gets channeled through concrete, leaving stretches of hard negative space cutting through, like the Dominguez Channel, which has a trickle I can see from the overpass. The last trace of a brambly wetland thick with grizzlies, formerly Dominguez Slough, and before that, the farmer's name and names long since erased on historical maps as no more than a racist epithet. Crenshaw Boulevard. More miles through which commercial and then residential alternate forever. Commercial. Fried chicken, a newer franchise with a banner of a tongue-out golden retriever and sunglasses. A very cool dog. Residential. Purple succulents against off-white stucco reverberating. Where driveways end, convex safety mirrors, there to help drivers with blind spots tilt down expressively. I'm in my 40s and look it. I used to find blocks like these excruciating. Home after sun-bleached home dotted with office parks or shopping. Built in 1962 or 19... unmarked by either fantasy or history. But maybe I missed something. Maybe it's a tactic, a way of refusing. These cities reproduced and reproducible, the strip malls churning with turnover, but somehow unchanged, how they duck under the radar, beyond the vision of even visionary real estate speculation. High voltage lattice towers, as if in migration, lumbered through a green swath, cut through the neighborhood near a substation. Potted trees and temporary greenhouses in either direction where nursery takes advantage of the easement. The onset was so gradual, I barely note that there's rain. I'm wet. I'm at the 405, along which is an anonymous pile, tall as a freeway, linked to no construction that I can see, a hill of perfectly indeterminate debris, a general monument to future built things and to their coming apart. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I love how you embrace the boredom of the walk and we get, without making the reader feel bored, but get that sense of this, it's this moving from one thing to the other. And it's such a great portrait. It's a really good portrait of Los Angeles to me too. But I'll talk to you more after we have a chance for Willa to read too, but it was really fun to hear you read. So thank you. So Willa takes us into different territory. We're getting a non-urban adventure in walking. Willa Zong is a writer from the suburbs of Los Angeles who lives in Missoula, Montana. Her writing has appeared in the Southern Review, the Hopkins Review, the Masters Review, and elsewhere. She is currently completing her MFA in nonfiction from the University of Montana, where she is working on a book of essays about camping alone in the American West as the child of Chinese immigrants. Willa, so and is this essay part of that collection?
Yeah, well, hopefully, with any
Great.
luck.
Good.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you, Nabil, for that reading. Reading your piece just really brought me back to LA. The good and bad of it, the freeways, I don't miss that. So yeah, it was so evocative. And thank you to Anne for organizing this event, and to Christine and Dora for just a wonderful publication, and for bringing together such a cool project. So my piece in the folio is called Young Asian Female Alone. And this piece, I'm going to read a couple sections of it, so that you have kind of context, and then I can move to the walking section. But yeah, this piece came out of an address that I wanted to make to a stranger that I met in the course of some travels. And yeah, this was a time when I lived in California. So I live in Montana now, but I did used to have California plates. Yeah. Hey, you said, your voice flagging me down. I noticed you also have California plates. You gestured at my car, then your car. You were young, Asian, female, alone. I was young, Asian, female, alone. You were dressed in a way that reminded me of 20-year-olds in scenic stomping grounds like West Hollywood, Williamsburg. Tight lavender tank, loose red cargo shorts, no bra. I was wearing one of 2 pairs of earth-colored leggings I'd been hiking in for about a month now, and my feet were almost glued to my tan Tevas with a combination of sweat and dirt. A shower of sweet onion chip crumbs had fallen to the ground when I got out of my car to use the gas station restroom. Yeah, I said, not surprised that you had noticed me, but that you had spoken up. Where are you from? The subtext we left unspoken. What brings someone like you to a place like Evanston, Wyoming? You were from the Bay Area and driving cross country to New York. I took another look at your car. It was filled with cardboard boxes and stray velvet hangers. For a job, I asked. No, you said. You were just figuring it out. You looked a few years younger than me, but somehow I felt like I knew you, like you were someone I had grown up with, graduated high school with. Maybe you had played clarinet in marching band, edited the newspaper, shouldered your load of APs, unflinching. Maybe you had done well and gone to Berkeley or Stanford. But then maybe you had gone against the grain, shunned the groomed trails of doctor, lawyer, engineer, and studied art history or literature or sociology, graduated into the middle of a global pandemic. Here, I'm going to skip ahead a few paragraphs. From behind your car, a truck towing a long trailer pulled up. An older white woman hopped out. Maybe I knew before she even said a word, the aggressive way she parked askew, the hunch to her back as she stalked past us. Maybe my stomach twisted before a word was spoken. Get a move on, will you? I'm in a hurry. You're holding me up, she snarled at you, avoiding eye contact. I saw you startle. Around us, others pulled in and out of the gas station. History, experience, America. It was all passing over your face as it was perhaps passing over mine. Sorry, you said. I wish you hadn't said sorry. I wish you hadn't hurried to your car, waving goodbye to me, and I wish I hadn't waved goodbye back. There were things I wanted to ask you, to say to you, things that weren't of great importance, but somehow maybe the little time we spent together could be. I wanted to rest a little longer in this oasis of familiarity you had become for me. We were 2 girls talking at a gas station, belonging there as much as anyone belonged anywhere, but how quickly we were made to scatter. I got back in my car, dazed. The woman's husband came up to my window, tapping and shouting something, his face an old blur of pink. In my confusion, I had left the gas nozzle in. He told me to wake the fuck up and walked away. The anger in his face was grotesque in the light. I pulled the nozzle out. I put it back in its holster. I pulled onto the highway, shaking with anger. The type of anger that never really fades, but pulses forward and twists tightly and morphs into something whose only aim is to bite, tear, chew forward, muscling up for an unknown future. The day after I left you, I began walking. The trail was empty of people, the trees blocked the horizon, and I startled a moose in the undergrowth. I didn't realize how massive Moose could be until she burst across the trail just yards away from me. She was fleeing, but then she stopped and trained her eyes on me. Before I saw her calf, the knowledge of its presence prickled through my body. It stood where she had left it by the river, and for a few heart-pounding seconds, only my body separated the two. The feeling of snapping the taut, invisible line stretched between them stayed with me for hours. In the miles after the moose, I clapped my hands intermittently and yelled monosyllabic nonsense into the air, not wanting to startle any other large mammals. Some instinct would not let me feel at peace. I felt unmoored, like it was possible that in these moments, no one who loved me knew exactly where I was. At the end of the trail, I found 3 older white men wandering the shore of the lake. I thought of the old woman at the gas station, her angry man. Perhaps it was a primal urge that had come swelling out of them to say, "This is mine, this is mine, this is mine," meaning, "This does not belong to you." I made my way to a large rock along the windswept shore, taking in the improbable red castle of a rock that loomed above us all from across the water. "Hello," one of the men called out to me, his voice warm. "Hello," I called back. "So beautiful, isn't it?" he said, and together we took in the view. We talked about the red rock, the trail, the backcountry camp spots carved out of the lakeshore. None of it belonged to any of us, so relating felt simple. We accepted that we had all come down the same path to this spot, by this lake, on this day. I had walked 10 miles to get here, the only criterion to belong. I relaxed a little, glad for friendly company in the quiet forest, and slowly some self-assurance came trickling back. The other 2 were walking around the marshy shore, exploring, filtering water. They invited me to join them for dinner around a campfire. After setting up my tent, I brought firewood I'd gathered over to their clearing and accepted a healthy pour of bourbon into my tin mug. I scooted closer to the flames they'd started and felt warmed. The 3 of them had gone to high school together in Palos Verdes, an oceanside suburb of LA that, from the outside, is not altogether different from the foothill suburb of LA where I grew up. Although 2 of them now lived in San Diego, 2 hours south, they'd been getting together for years to take annual backpacking trips and lead Boy Scout expeditions. "I've taken dozens of backpacking trips in my life," Jacques said, "but I don't think I've ever gone out alone." "Come to think of it, me neither," said Peter. "I don't think I'd want to. It'd be kind of frightening." The 3 of them were staring at me, waiting for me to explain myself. What could I say? The day that I'd met you, not far down the road from where I'd camped, I saw cars gathered along a bluff and pulled over. I walked down an incline to find clumps of people wandering slowly through a valley in the clear morning light. They were peering down at something cutting through the center of the grassy meadow. I moved closer and saw that it was a thin creek flowing into a dammed lake at the bottom of the valley. When I peered into the creek, I saw hundreds of brilliant red and spotted kokanee salmon, scales catching and releasing the light, floating to the end of their lives. They're an inland species, I read off a helpful wooden board, a type of sockeye salmon believed to have split off from their seafaring relatives when shifting glaciers cut off their access to the ocean. They live their lives in freshwater now, but still make a semblance of the iconic salmon journey from river to freshwater lake to river, the beating muscle memory of migration carrying them forward even when the sea was an inaudible roar to the west. They clumped together in 2s and 3s and 10s. There were some that floated alone, some who had already passed on, their carcasses caught, still shimmering on rocks in the middle of the creek. There were occasional scuffles, reds and silvers glinting as they jockeyed into position to breed. I marveled at the way the drama of their lives extended over the course of the creek. I paced the length of the valley watching them, these thousands of muscular red fish that had, against all odds, swum the rivers of their ancestors, passed through human barriers, avoided the sharp talons and claws of eagles and bears, and arrived here to spawn the next generation of their species and die. They were beautiful. They came when called to the end of their lives. And along the creek, there were no fences, no guards, no signs saying, "Stay back, please don't touch." There were just curious humans stepping lightly along the valley, peering into the creek to catch a glimpse, a tiny, fleeting portal into the mysterious life of salmon. They made me feel, however briefly, that I understood something about beauty, about the world. There were more canyons and mountains and rivers and creeks on this planet that I wanted to see. It felt like instinct to want these places and experiences, to seek them out and see if I could belong there. What was frightening was to admit these desires to myself, because I understood that in admitting them, there was nothing to do but go, even if that meant going alone. But that was also the joy of it, knowing that it was going to be frightening, but giving myself permission again and again to try regardless. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really wonderful. It's amazing how I love hearing things I've already read, to myself, but then just hearing them read out loud. And those salmon really came to life. I mean, they came to life for me on the page, but just hearing you read and the transition from that human encounter to one that was a kind of human and fish encounter really just was beautiful, beautiful movement. And I'll have some more questions about it soon, but thank you. And I love these two together. I think they worked really nicely, that we have to show something of the range of the collection and the types of places that are traversed in the collection. One of the little things, I saw Nabil smile because he didn't get to the very end of his essay, but he ends in Palos Verdes. So there's this funny little, it's a leitmotif going back to the LA thing that is accidental, but funny that we have a little spot of Southern California in there.
And we also just had our launch in LA too, which was fun. I mean, just
Yeah.
to continue that, yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. How did that go? You had a launch party, but it was recent, right?
But yeah, it was just last week.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was great. It was really wonderful. We had a great group of readers. Nabil was one of them, and Rena, who's here too, who also lives in LA. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it was, I mean, I think it's funny that we had like both of our launches for this folio were in probably the most famously hostile places for walkers, where walking is just like suspect, and like, why would you do that? Like, well, the other one was Detroit in September.
Oh, that's really funny. So the car culture, taking over car culture by having talking about walking. But obviously there are a lot of walkers in LA, as shown in your folio. I want to ask, have you talk a little bit, Christine, about the impetus for the collection and how it came to be? And also, after you tell me that, about sort of, were you surprised by the response you got to when you sent out the call?
Yeah, so in about sometime in 2021, in the midst of like quarantine and pandemic and Zoom hell, Anna Maria reached out to me. It was initially 100% her idea, and she invited me to dream up this collection with her, and because she also knows I've been teaching this class on walking that you mentioned in my bio for a long time, and I'm like an avid collector, so I had a huge like bibliography of touchstone works, both visual art and sound art, as well as literary texts. And anyway, so we just began sort of thinking about musing, what writers would we like to gather together. And we were initially just going to focus on the essay itself. And also, I think, so in the context of COVID, I think that collaboration, we were just really like yearning for, some connection, as we're both taking a lot of walks like the rest of the country in our separate states. And that was also a sort of like peak moment, not that it ever goes away, of like anti-Asian hate. And so I think that was a big impetus as well. Also, like, there were the country that was not yet awakened to racial violence was sort of also coming, awake to that. So there's a lot of things politically going on that seemed like it was a really good moment for it. Like the hiking in national parks went up like 600%. Some amazing amount of people were out there walking. So we had this idea for thinking about, and I had talked to her a lot about my class and thinking about, like, when I first started teaching it, it was like the people that sort of immediately come to mind for a lot of people about walking are like Socrates and Rousseau, Thoreau, Wordsworth, Baudelaire, but Benjamin, just all these like guys who who really involve themselves in this mythology of the autonomous genius writer wandering around having big thoughts. Like Nietzsche said, all truly great thoughts are conceived by walking. So we really wanted to think about walking in some in a way that felt more real to us, and that reflected our own and other people we know's experience of walking, that includes fear and hostility. And that's the thing about like Willa's piece, for instance. When I first read that, when I got to the part about her encountering these guys, I was like, run, like,
Yeah, me too.
like
I know.
I feel like it was interesting in terms of like my expectations, and and I like also that cut, to like, how can I explain myself? And then the cut to the salmon, as a way, as
Yeah.
a explanation
Yeah,
that includes that. Like, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one. I know I'm not the only one, because I read it with my class, and they often had similar reaction, to that encounter, the tension there. So, I mean, I could go on and on, but
that
about the
was,
impetus
well,
for it. But yeah, so then we Anna Marie, I think, is an associate editor with the Hopkins Review, and she approached Dora, who's here. Hi, Dora. Thank you so much. It was amazing to work with. Just like an incredible experience. And just in terms of inspiration and generosity and vision and organization, like things that don't often go together. But yeah, so that we put out the call. And your other question, I guess, was about were we surprised by the response? And I guess we were. Yeah, I mean, there was hundreds of submissions, and so it and we only had like a short window. I think it was like 5 or 6 weeks that the call been. So it, it was a lot, but it was really great, to read a lot of the pieces, and to also just kind of get like a core sampling of what people were thinking out there about walking. And some of the pieces had nothing to do with walking, like there was just some some people clearly hadn't really read the prompt very well, or so yeah. But yeah, it was a really fantastic experience. Most everybody that we included, some people we knew, some people we had asked beforehand in order to put it in the call, as a kind of like a tractor for others who might want to join the community. But we also had these kind of categories we tried to prompt people with, in terms of thinking about writing and the bibliography of touchstone texts and artist works that people might want to participate, like use in their pieces as well.
Interesting. So you had a few. So did you have some back and forth with some of the people who contributed by having a kind of dialogue with texts that already existed?
Well, it was just sort of out there as a possibility. So if you, I think that I assume that people weren't necessarily writing pieces for the call.
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious. I guess I've never asked the people that are here. I assume
that's a
people
good
like, oh, I
question.
have something. Here it is. But I could be wrong. I personally don't write that fast, but maybe other people do.
So did you, that's a good, well, I could take that to our guests. Did you, our other guests, did you see the call? You saw the call and you had a piece ready, or did you think about, oh, there's something I'm going to write for this?
In my case, I was pretty much done with this piece. And I think it was more of a moment of like reading the call and resonating with it. This piece obviously includes a walk, but I think actually what called me more than that was just how writing for me is such a practice of, or walking is such a practice of writing. Like they're so intrinsically linked. And although my piece is about like walking in nature, and I do think that that's what I end up writing about a lot, just like in the process of actually like sitting down to return to those memories, it's like an imperative to take neighborhood walks. I don't know how else to really like sort through those
Mhm.
thoughts beyond being able to like walk around, and specifically like neighborhood, like not hiking. That's too stimulating. It needs to be a little bit understimulating, so your brain can kind of get going. But yeah, I think as soon as I read Anna Maria's and Christine's description, and also, I mean, the other collaborators, like I saw Claudia Rankine and I was like, oh, I was totally attracted. So that was effective. But yeah, as soon as I saw the call, I was thinking like, oh yeah, that piece includes writing, and walking. Oh my gosh, I keep confusing the two. But yeah, but walking is
Thought
so
about that.
essential to me, that I have to kind of go for it and hope that they see the connection too, which they clearly did.
Mhm. Great. That's, what about you, Nabil?
Um, actually, my experience was a little more confusing. I had been in touch with Anna Maria before. I think there was a walking was in the air for a couple, maybe even a year before it had a forum with the Hopkins Review. So I had been walking again. I did the same thing. I had been writing about sort of travel and placedness and thinking about kind of moving through spaces. And so I was excited about and already reading a lot about like traveling and the urban landscape and things like that. Uh, but then in the end, I had this big sort of change in my life, which I moved from coast to coast, and I did have a few things that could have fit, but I did use it as an opportunity to write something new because I was trying to like process this experience of like coming back to LA after so many years, and it felt interesting because I never was like I kind of like at a distance. I'm interested in like flaneur and flaneury, but like my walking experience has actually mostly been in wilderness, extended backpacking trips. I was like a wilderness guide at one point, and so the kind of lens I brought to walking through LA, my first like impulse was to put on like supportive shoes and make sure I had enough water and sunscreen, just like all the things I might do if I had, it was very different from most people's experience. So it was an unusual kind of opportunity for me to kind of like get some think thoughts about like my new experience and my new situation.
And what made you decide that you would just pick a street and follow it? I love that idea of like just picking something like a line and following it and deciding that that's going to determine what you've done. That there's a famous LA food critic, Jonathan Gold, who once ate his way Pico Boulevard from downtown to the ocean. And I just always love that sort of linear thinking of how just a street, because a street itself, especially a long street, can reveal so much about terrain. So I'm just curious what made you decide that was the way you were going to walk.
I mean, honestly, luckily I was new enough to LA that I didn't fully I knew there was a lot of writing about LA. Of course, I've read a little bit of Mike Davis and things like that, but I didn't really dig in. If I had, I would probably have been intimidated. It's just like it's a whole sub, obviously not as big as Hollywood, but there's a huge chunk of literature that's come out of America that is about kind of like trying to come to terms with the weird entity that is LA. And so it was a little bit arbitrary, to be honest. It was a street that both was familiar to my experience when I was younger in the suburb and was like part of my daily experience in so basically I was looking at Google Maps. What stitched these two together? Only later did I write, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting his name. Former editor of the LA Times book review, of book reviews in the LA Times. He wrote a book and he walks down Western. I was so thankful that I didn't
I
even
know that. Yeah.
hadn't read that before. And there was also there's just been a lot of writing about Western, which was interesting to experience later on.
Yeah, well, Christine, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, one of the things I'm really struck by the collection is that there's this wonderful quality of surprise in it. And there are things that are unexpected, like types of essays that are unexpected. There's one that's online. So this has both the folio in print, and then some of the folio pieces are online. And then there's like, it's like getting a little bonus magazine or something inside. There's some essays online that aren't in the print version, which are all when I discovered that, because I didn't discover the first, I thought, oh, it's like a hidden treasure. I just there's more. But there's one called like How to Walk in a Nightclub, which is about how you walk basically in altered states and sleep deprived and in a nightclub, and all the various kinds of walking that goes in, and sort of musing about what walking means when you can hardly stand up and when you want to dance. And it just is amazing. But there's this quality of surprise to it, like how, and I feel like there are other essays like that just have this surprising, unexpected take on walking. So I'm just curious if how that influenced you and what you was that something you were looking for, or was it just like, oh, there's all this surprise and I'm going to go with it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Probably a little bit of both. We were definitely open and interested in expanding our own ideas about what is a walk, right? So that's also where that like litany of questions comes from, because each of those questions is tied, at least in our minds, to the essays in the or the pieces in the folio. And so that was part, like we had so much material that it didn't fit into the folio, so that we had to spill out. Thankfully, the Hopkins Review was very generous in allowing us to publish all of the pieces that we wanted to. And yeah, I mean, I that is definitely a lot of our conversation had to do with where, how do we understand the walking in the pieces, and trying not to be like too redundant in terms of how we represented the walk. So when we were thinking about the whole, pieces got included and excluded based in part on the whole, the structure, and thinking about how each piece might add something either geographically or in terms of or conceptually to the walk, because that's the only thing it had to have, right? Like we didn't really, I mean, there's a lot of, like Willa was saying, there's a lot of and Nabil too, like literature that's created out of walking, but you might not know it, I mean, you might feel it a little bit somatically, but there's no indication, right, that was made by walking. But that got too nebulous, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so it's like it was a good way of narrowing it down to have this other topic. But yeah, we definitely wanted. That's partly why we organized our call around certain kind of like nomadic themes, like like the Flinner, or like constraint walks, or walking in the context of current or historical violence, or walking borders, or, you know, these, so just to kind of stimulate people's imaginations and to broaden what, you know, what they even think of as a walk. So anyway, so yeah, that was a big part of our process of putting the work together and deciding, you know, what was what we were going to include in the do I call it in the folio?
Well, I think that there's also something about the way that it's assembled, and I think this may happen a lot with anthologies in general collections, but they talk to each other, the pieces talk to each other. And I'm curious, from the writer's point of view, when you saw, and the other writers who are here, sort of in the audience, if you want to join in, I'd love to hear from you too, that when you see your piece in the context of these other pieces, does that make you think differently about walking and writing? Did there something about, were there pieces that either resonated with you in particular, or some that maybe challenged you or felt like they were in counter to what you were writing and saying? What, you know, the reader feels a kind of dialogue, but I'm curious if the writers feel that dialogue as well.
Yeah, I mean, just taking Nabil's piece as an example, when I read his piece, I was no longer living in LA, but and I know he said Western Ave, you know, to other people should have this kind of blank connotation, but obviously to me it brought up like so many memories and so many stomping grounds. But yeah, I think reading other people's pieces, it was kind of like I felt like I had this one relationship to walking, and it's so special to me. You know, I was like writing and walking, those are so intrinsic to the process. And like I think kind of having that intimate glimpse into what it means, not only for other walkers, but for other walkers who are also writing, and how it brings up such different things for them. I think that was like a bit of a, you know, it's like a little bit surprising, because it's like you think you have this like very special relationship to this thing, and it turns out other people have very special intimate relationships as well. And I'm thinking about that piece, I'm flipping through it, like Ernest Ogun Yemi's, you know, how he's talking about like writing as pain and like suffering. I was like, right, yeah, there's all these elements, like there's the light side to writing or walking, and then there's the kind of there can be a darkness to that as well, when it's like walking as necessity, or with no other options. So yeah, I think it was really cool to be in that conversation that kind of broke open my own ideas of what kind of writing and walking relationship to me. I always think of like writing and walking as like overall a very positive kind of connection, but yeah, to think of times when it might be actually like harmful to your writing process, or against your work in some way, was, yeah, super interesting.
Oh, that's good.
I think that piece that Ernest what was it called? I'm trying to remember the title of it. Anyway, that piece is one of the only pieces that talks about like walking out of necessity, like you say, because you can't afford to do anything else, you know. And it was, I think it was a shifting portrait. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think that is one that's both online and in the print journal as well. And he is an undergraduate, which blew me away.
that does blow me away. His voice is so, I pictured somebody so much older, but that's amazing.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing. But I was also thinking of like Petra Kupper's piece, which is about like, you know, walking in space. Like we put on our space suits, and we, you know, walk around, like imagine what it's like to walk without gravity, and, you know, what does your planet look like? And so there's that also is but I want to also hear what the writers have to say. I was just
No,
excited.
but that was good. I'm
Brought that
glad
one
you
up.
brought that piece up though, because that one also was one of the great surprises. This sort of sci-fi that's from the point of view of disability. So it's also it's an imagining a kind of utopian way of walking without gravity. It was great. So that was yeah, that certainly expands the view of what walking is. Anybody else have any of you in the audience want to say anything about that, or Nabil about your about what were there essays that spoke to you or felt like they expanded your idea of what walking is, or what walking and writing is?
The only thing I mean, the same as Willa, just I was very excited to be part of like this expanded vision of walking. I think it's the only thing I can add is just that every piece sort of made mine stranger, which is what I would like,
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
that
Yeah.
I feel like that's because being next to the sort of starship somatics and all these other ways of framing makes the like I feel got closer, even if I didn't have the language to express exactly what I was getting at. It made it closer, more expansive. So I feel lucky to be part of that, and also just to be like a part of a mini canon that pushes against this long history that this it's just hard to get out of peripatetic Socratic method, the romantic philosopher walking through the Alps, just like all of the Baudelaire, just these are lovely, kind of enchanting, mesmerizing myths, but we all walk, so I think recuperating that, thinking about ourselves and our bodies and how we navigate space, and pushing against all these narratives that are put on us. I just like it's ongoing, and I appreciate this as like a little bulwark rather than just my little essay. It's like a little bit more of has a little heft to it, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I love that idea that your essay becomes stranger. And I think I felt that reading it, the way that it was placed. So that's good. Congratulations, Christine, for the sequencing, because I think that, and just hearing you read it too, I mean, it has a surreal quality to it of you have these ordinary things, but all of a sudden they feel so surreal, the giant donut looming up and the unfinished freeway and all that. But it's also that there's something about the context that we've been primed to look for that too. So that was a good point to make. Okay, thank you. You don't need to talk. I'm sorry about the COVID. Rena, do you want to say anything? No? Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of walking not always being pleasant, which Christine brought up. But it was also something that Nabil and I, it came up in our exchange because I had told him that as a teenager, I once, this is an LA thing, but a friend of mine and I once decided to walk the entire length of Ventura Boulevard, which is in the San Fernando Valley, which is, I think, 19 miles. And it was just like a whimsical thing. I didn't even think of myself as like a walker then, but I said this and he said, oh, that sounds much more pleasant. And I was thinking about, and of course, in some ways it was, but there's also like, dealing with cars and weirdness, but it was probably much more pleasant. It was true. But it made me think about the word pleasant and about this collection as a whole, which is that walking doesn't always have to be pleasant. And I didn't know if you wanted to say something more about this, if you had more to say about that. One of the things in Willa's that we talked about is there were these wonderful there are these great joyful moments. I mean, there's so much sort of joy and almost ecstatic visions, but there's also fear and agitation and uncertainty, and they kind of are of a piece. It's not like you are overcoming one thing to get to the other. It kind of just flows along. And with Nabil, we talked about, before I mentioned the idea of boredom and physical pain. You have both of those in it. So just talk a little bit about the unpleasantness of walking and what makes it worth doing. Anyway.
Yeah, I think for me, part of the unpleasantness when I want to write about walking, and kind of in my mind, like that's connected to like being outside and being like a young Asian female woman outside and how people react to that, is kind of to push back on like these grand narratives, like Outside Magazine, whatever. I took this amazing hike. I had a great time. Like, maybe the only problem was that I couldn't find enough firewood, but like, honestly, all good, like, because in my experience of being outdoors alone in pursuit of like backpacking, hiking, so walking, there's so much more anxiety and so many more unknowns. Like, what are the challenges I'm going to face as I like stand at this trailhead? Like, I really don't know what's down this path. And I don't think that that's often represented, especially in writing about outdoor spaces. The challenges seem to often be much more physical, or I don't know, even like financial, but like they're not really necessarily spiritual, psychological, cultural. And so, yeah, on one hand, I want to represent like, I'm also totally seduced by like, I love backpacking because I'm like, I want to see a sexy lake, I get that. And I'm totally drawn by that. But the challenges that I feel like I face in pursuit of that, I think go way deeper. And that's often what I'm writing about is like, I want to just be able to care freely, be like, I'm just taking a backpacking trip or I'm taking a hike. But, somehow it always ends up with me thinking about like my positionality or my family history a lot of times, or like, who are the people here before me? Like, it's just so much more complicated and less kind of like wonderfully traipsing through the woods than I ever hope for it to be. Um, and just another thought that I had thinking about Nabil's piece too was that I think he mentions he's walking in September. And I think I was also walking in September, and I was thinking about like September in LA is maybe just the edge of like acceptable kind of conditions. But yeah, how often like walking in urban spaces, like the heat is just the hell. Like walking in LA in like August, I would rather not. And so like just, yeah, those physical kind of barriers and uncomfortable, like walking does not exist in a vacuum. It has to be September really to get going on that. So yeah, I just thought it was kind of a fun connection as well.
Yeah, you don't live in Philadelphia. I miss August in LA because August in Philadelphia is truly hell. But so Nabil, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, that's why I moved to LA. I couldn't stand August in Philadelphia. I love winter, but the summers were very challenging. The only thing I can add to that is maybe something about, I mean, it's so complicated, right? Because it's like this, it's kind of specific, but also if you start pulling the thread, it's kind of like how is walking not the whole universe kind of. Maybe one thing I'll add to that is just that there's something that I'm really drawn to by the essay as a form. At least one way of framing the essay is kind of an artifact of thinking, an artifact of a human thinking, and that frame is so much. It like really lends itself to the essay walk, because you're putting this arbitrary frame around a period of time. And what's interesting about that is it turns any period of time into this sort of archetypal journey. And maybe kind of resonating with what Willa said, a lot of my experiences in the past have been around sort of ecstatic natural environments where I personally have tried to like find myself in these places and for these particular purposes, of the lake, the glacier, the top of the mountain. But then the only thing I can add is I was a tour guide briefly, and it was very interesting day in and day out to go on a hike with other people, and you'll be like, okay, at this point people are going to like gasp at how beautiful it is. At this point people are going to yawn. At this point people are going to like talk about what they're going to eat at the end of it. And you realize there's like a form to it, and you're like, oh my gosh, I am also part of that form. And it's actually something really you can observe, and it's both private and something that's like totally shared and kind of almost expected in a particular way. There's a genre to it that I find in endlessly interesting.
That's
just
fascinating.
some
Have you written about
provocations,
that?
but
Have you ever written about that? Written an essay about that, about being a tour guide?
I did, yeah. Actually, there's one kind of extended essay in my
Yeah.
book about being a guide that kind of touches on some of that stuff. But anyway,
That makes me
it,
sorry.
Go ahead, Willa.
That makes me also think about you know, how when people point out like national parks, like the word park is in the name and it's suggestive of like amusement parks because yeah, in some ways it's you think it's kind of like your own special discovery. But Nabil's point kind of yeah underscores there is this kind of expectation of it, right? It's like very guided on a trail. Like this is designed for you to have this specific kind of journey with a beginning, kind of a peak, and then you know the
Mhm.
end, your feet hurt.
Yeah.
Like yeah, it's all kind of designed, which is super fascinating.
Yeah, that was and Nabil's essay, you get at it because you talk a little bit in the essay about the arc. Like you sort of say, oh, this is maybe the moment that this is the, I forget exactly how you word it, but this is like the turning point or something. But at the same time, then you subvert that throughout the essay so it stays kind of flat and uniform in a certain way too, one thing after another. It's like you play with those expectations. I felt like when I read it. So that was really interesting. I want to move on to questions from the audience, and we have one already that I think goes really sort of picks up on what Nabil was saying about that the essay and the walking essay. And this is from Molly Wagner. She said, "What is the process walkers writers use? Do you write notes while walking, take photos, recordings, walk first, then write?" So that would be an interesting question about the writing process when you're taking a walk.
Yeah, I think in my mind I've generally thought of like walking really has like two modes for me. It's like I mentioned earlier, there is the traipsing through the wilderness, like having the experience kind of walking, like the hiking, backpacking. And in those times, I would say generally I'm just trying to be in the moment, you know, I'm not trying to like write things down or I'm journaling, but it's not really I'm not trying to have like a prescribed experience necessarily. And then the other mode is the okay, now I'm sitting down and I'm really trying to like tease out, you know, why this moment stuck in my mind while taking a walk or while taking one of the hikes or in a related kind of moment. Um, and those times I'm really trying to like I'm telling myself I'm taking a little walk for my health and my mental health, but I am secretly hoping that my brain will just cough up some of the answers to like some of the tangles I'm working on or whatever. You know, I don't try to pressure myself too much. I don't like set out on the neighborhood walk to be like, all right, we have to solve this problem today, but I'm kind of hoping that by like looking the other way, my brain will just like naturally, you know,
Mhm.
jump forth with the solution. But I will also say that I think I'm coming around a little bit on maybe combining the two a little bit. I think that now I've had some experiences with other writers, like kind of being out in nature and simultaneously like producing poetry. And yeah, so I don't know if I would ever be able to produce kind of like prose while having like an outdoor kind of walking or just outdoor experience. But I'm finding recently that, yeah, poetry just lends itself so much better. It's like these kind of short thoughts
Mhm.
and it does give you definitely a different impression of the experience if you're kind of in that, if you're hearing the poetic kind of like pacing in your mind and you've been like thinking about it, maybe hearing other people's poetry, like it does really start to overlay the walking and being outside. So yeah, that's been kind of an exciting new discovery.
Yeah, that's great. I've had a similar discovery too, that it's something about the short pieces and also that the rhythm of walking and the rhythm of poetry go nicely together. I'm curious, Nabil, because of your timestamps and things, I didn't know if you did some recording as you were walking uh when you were doing that walk, like were you giving yourself voice memos?
yeah, honestly, this is much more like a procedural essay than anything I've written before. And even then, I cheat and I'm editing quite a lot, but this was so in my I've written quite a lot about like traveling and thinking about travel and travel writing, and it's really funny because every time I sit down like, oh, that one experience, I'm gonna write this essay, and I was like, I have that journal still, and I'll open this journal that I took with me to Guatemala, and I'll go to that page, and there'll be like 3 doodles in it. I'll be like, what was wrong with me? Why didn't I write that down? I know there's, this is gonna be helpful. And so this was the opposite of that, where I was like constantly, or as almost constantly taking voice memos and images. And in fact, I put the constraint on myself. Not that there were many constraints, but I actually had to restructure the essay several times because I got the order wrong. And I went back to the timestamps and I was like, that didn't happen. That didn't happen in that order. And it was very interesting that my
Yeah.
mind was so challenged to think linearly. Anyway, going on a little bit of tangent, but this was a highly unusual writing practice for me, and it was very documented. There's quite a lot of little fragments in space and time of artifacts from the actual
Yeah.
event.
I mean, that comes off, I like the way that works. It works really well with that walk because there's such a directness to it. And you also you have insights, but they're also kind of aside. I mean, we move past them in an interesting way. I loved your insight. You read it at the beginning about and it's really about the diversity of the city. I mean, it says something about we live in this diverse world and these diverse cities, but now I can't find it. About the commemorations. You say somebody well, I'll find it later. Let's see. It's at the very beginning. Oh, or this is what I've learned on this walk. Los Angeles has a lot to commemorate, or local government has many constituent bases, don't forget. There's just something about the casualness of that thought that really works well. That just is that but it's like when you go back to it, it's like, oh wow, that's a great insight, but it's also just a kind of side note, which I thought worked really well. So I don't know
Also
if
so much about time too.
What?
I mean, the essay itself is so much about
Yeah.
time and like trying to stitch together the past self with the present self, but also like I think it doesn't ever allow us to immerse into it without noticing those timestamps, like so you're always being brought back to the time it took, instead of just having this, completely absorptive experience as you're reading.
Yeah, and it's sort of keeping track, and also that there's a lot of thematic things about time, your past, city's time, past. It's that's a
that would be been my answer to your question, would be more about like constraints or prompts, for walking, and also the sort of like collective walk or the protest walk, or the like I have my students do like an altered states walk where they have to do the same walk like 5 times in different states.
oh, wow.
So like, I try to steer them away from like drugs and alcohol, but of course, inevitably that features into it. But like sometimes like they'll do it in the middle of the night when they're exhausted, or they'll have a playlist, or, so they'll get into character, and Willa's walk really reminded me of the doppelganger walk because of this person she meets in the beginning, who she carries around with her as a kind of companion that she's talking to, who was also like a kind of doppelganger. And of course, in German, it means double walker, right? The doppelganger. And there's like a whole history of especially visual arts that employ the double as a walking trope, like Carrie Mae Weems' famous photo series called Rome. It's a play on ROAM and ROME, where she's like positioning herself as a Black woman in front of all these stately architecture in Rome and around Europe as a way of contesting those sites, and also like the history of those sites, but also inserting herself into them.
Yeah. It's and that was also, that made your essay, it wasn't we talked before about like, what's the standard travel walking essay, but I think by introducing that encounter at the beginning and this woman that you took, that you carry with you in a way, you give her the trip even if she doesn't have her own, in a way, or at least for us, and that really changes it. I mean, it just changes the whole course of the walk, because you have had this encounter where you are alone, you are sort of singular, but then you have this double, so you're not so singular after all, which is really wonderful. Now, there's some other questions on here. I also want you to, if people are keeping their eye on the chat or not, I don't know, but people have like put in recommendations for other things to read and talking about their own processes. So it's a really good, there's a lot of lively dialogue going on in the chat, which is always wonderful on Zoom. So take a look if you can. Both Jonathan Stalls, who's here, and Antonia Malchik, who are going to be our guests next time, and I'll get to them in a minute. We're talking about using photos, which is something that I do a lot too, is that I take photos kind of as mental notes and then try to go back and reuse those as prompts. Get that they tend to remind me of what I saw, and also are a chronology if I get my chronology messed up, which I have been known to do too.
You could also use, like, I had my students record their walk, like what they wrote after they walked, and then they had to retrace that walk, listening to their essay, and they really love that as like a revision practice too. So it's not necessarily only about like the initial writing experience or walking experience, but also as a way of revising the work, carrying it around with you, and letting your mind just discover things about it that you wouldn't have otherwise, by the kind of kinetic energy of walking.
Mm-hmm. That so here's one other question. We'll make this our last question, and then I actually have a question, and then we'll talk about next time. But also, if any of you have anything else to say, well, we still have a few more minutes. But this is from William Sharp, who also teaches a class on walking at Barnard. So you two should compare notes, Christine and Bill. Does writing about walking lead to solitary walking as opposed to walking in a club environment or just with a group of friends? And I'll follow up on that, because I did have a question about both your walks are solo, and I was thinking about the difference between a solitary walk and walking with others. So that may be, but Bill's question is a little different, which is, do you think that writing about walking leads to solitary walking?
The first assignment I have for my, not to always bring it back to this class, but I have for my classes, for them to get into small groups and do a found objects walk, where they, they each have to pick up something and bring it back to the class and kind of create some sort of sculpture out of it, and then talk about it, and of course there's the derive, which is, oftentimes you have a group of 4 or 5 people that you're collectively drifting around the city together, and that's all. And so you have to sort of collaborate on decisions, and in terms of where you're going to go, and why, I guess, and who's in charge of that. But then so I don't necessarily think it only leads to solitary walking. In fact, a lot of the students in my classes will do walks together, like a slow walk, or just even like a kind of like tour. I had one student who did this incredible project where we have these like timely alerts. Our university like notifies everybody of, some crime that happened on campus. And it's mostly kind of really bogus, to be honest. And it's always like the same perpetrator, and you just have to wonder like who, anyway. So what she did was she created a map of all the places where the timely warnings had occurred while she was in school, and had people do a kind of a walk, a collective walk, where and then she would read the warnings
Oh.
at each place, to kind of prove her point, which is that this is not helping anybody stay safe. It was just the theater of safety, and also just, basically reinforcing racism on campus. So
Yeah. I don't know, either of you have anything to say about the writing, does writing lead more to solitary walking, or is it something that that becomes different than walking with a group of some sort or walking in a club?
Going back to what we kind of alluded to earlier, like what happens when you are included in a portfolio and seeing your work in conversation with others, is it does feel like the solitary activity became a group activity in a way, became choral in a way that I found to be really exciting. I'm really amazed when I hear Christine describe some of the prompts that she's
Me too.
because I think the essay as a form, maybe historically, or maybe it's just my own limited reading, it goes back to this Cartesian, like there's a person and the person is trapped inside their head, and that head can be in a place moving through XY coordinates, and that you're ultimately autonomous and responsible, and that it's just like not true. And even if you're pretending to be on an autonomous walk, that's just not true. Everyone, the earth is supporting you. And so I think that is kind of the lovely dialectic of walking, that it cannot possibly be a solitary activity, and yet it appears so.
Yes, exactly. And in Willis' essay, I really love the way how humans appear in it, because at the beginning you have that, that sort of mean couple in the gas station in their car, of course, and then we have the encounter with the guys, the older white guys who do, everybody. There is that little sense of, oh, is she in trouble? Is this going to be a day? I feel like, oh, are we entering deliverance or something? And then it turns out to be fine and a nice human encounter, and they're all like really admiring what you're doing. And then you end with the sort of humans, you're all together watching the fish, and that's you don't need to kind of have conversation, but there's this way that you're part of this bigger experience. So I really like the way the human enters in your solo walk. But do you have something else to say about that, the writing, solitude, and group dynamics?
Yeah, I guess thinking about like walking alone, ostensibly alone versus with other people, I think to me those are like two totally different activities, Like one is like we're doing like with people, it's like this is a hike, this is a social thing, or it's like catching up with a friend. It just has like a totally different purpose to me. And then walking alone is like that just feels like closer to like something of like a necessity, or just like a way to like connect back to myself. So yeah, I mean, I think that just in terms of like how it's affected my writing, I will say that since moving to Montana, I have been like hiking more with people, and so like end up just finding more like-minded people who want to do these things outdoors. And so I have just been having so many more experiences outside with other people. But it doesn't at all change like the personal relationship I have to my own walking and my own writing process. I think like I can be very protective of the solo walk because it just feels it just feels so integral to the writing walking process. It's like if I'm not walking, I'm not writing, and if I'm not writing, I'm not thinking, and if I'm not thinking, then what's the point? So yeah, I think basically the whole solo versus people thing, those are totally different walks and different relationships to writing for me.
Mhm.
Well, it could also feel social in some ways because, you're carrying around all these voices in your head and having conversations.
Right. So
the
it's like I don't even need a physical person. I'm already having conversations in my head. And you're just noticing different things, like when you walk alone, it's kind of like, yeah, a conversation, like Christine said, between what's in your head and what you're seeing. And as soon as a third element is introduced, like one friend, then I'm like, I'm not really paying attention to what we're walking past. I'm really focused and I'm not paying attention to what's in my head. I'm really focused on them as a person and what they're saying. So yeah, I think it kind of like obviously I love walking with friends and it's like a great way to catch up, but yeah, it's not like that's not when I'm at like the heart of my relationship to walk, Because we could just as easily be sitting in a coffee shop and it wouldn't really matter. So
It's interesting. Yeah. I find sometimes that other people notice other things, especially on a long walk. So it's like, again, that multiple perspective that, oh, somebody noticed, or especially if you walk with someone who knows things that you don't know. Like, I love walking with people who know what, like bird song, because it's like then that wakes you up to, oh, I'm
Yeah.
listening to this whole other dimension. So, I can I feel like there's a place for the collective walk, the collective in writing, because you get to perspectives that you might not have, and sometimes your own head isn't enough because I get like, oh, no way. So anyway, I just want to say as the last thing, there's an essay in this book, in this apology, that I think might be the last, that no, not quite, because it ends with this wonderful poem called Golden Age, but it's the last Uniquoc. And it really, I think it's one of the best things I've ever read about walking. And it's I don't know if I've read it, and am I unstable because you hear me? Am I here? Shoot. So I got, am I okay? Can you hear me? Did I
We
go
can
away
hear
for a
you.
second?
Yeah, you did stutter a little bit, but I think we got all the words.
Yeah, I looked at, everybody was frozen. It was like one of those bizarre moments. And so I'm just going to read this one quote from it, and you could all go and read the essay when you read the collection. But it's kind of ostensibly about the flannery, but it's also about writing. It says, the flaneur may waste his time without regret, because his time is never truly wasted, as long as the writer remains following faithfully behind, gleaning his refuse. If only what endures can signify, this suggests different values than what Flannery could ever offer. It's the writer who is charged then with making meaning out of nothing. The flaneur proves a paltry subject for the surveillance state. For those watching, there is continually nothing to report. For the writer, whose task is to salvage the everything that occurs when nothing is occurring, no subject could be richer. So I love that. Uh-oh.
That essay is very good. I'll just say.
She reads it really well
Yeah.
too. She read it in LA and then at University of Redlands, and
Yeah, I'm getting. Yeah, I would love to hear it read. That's really anyway. And it was, again, congratulations to your placement. I mean, the whole curation of it, because it comes at a moment that it's almost like it addresses everything else that's come before, and it just worked really beautifully. So it's a nice cap. So thank you all for joining, and thank you. And thank you again for this amazing folio, and thank you, the Hopkins Review, for publishing it. And I just urge everyone to go out and read it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Looking forward to
Thank
the
you.
next
Yeah,
one.
thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.